The year is 1574, a year when Europe breathed smoke instead of mercy. The plague had loosened its grip, but something darker lingered: fear. It clung to the edges of every sermon, every whisper, every woman's name spoken too softly. In a small village along the shadowed borders of Bavaria, a child was born beneath a blood-orange moon. Her mother said she came silent. No cry, no scream, only wide eyes that shimmered like storm water. They named her Ilara, a name meaning bright one, though brightness was a dangerous thing in a world that worshipped shadows. Her father was a mason, her mother a midwife, a woman who could bring life with her hands and herbs. The villagers came to her for cures, for fevers, for lost milk, for infants who wouldn't breathe. But healing, in the wrong century, was never just healing. It was witchcraft waiting to be accused. Ilara grew in thatched roof silence, among the scent of crushed lavender and smoke. She learned early that the world did not like women who knew things. Her mother taught her about roots that stopped bleeding, leaves that soothed burns, prayers that stitched wounds. But she also taught her to whisper those words only when the church bells were not ringing. At 7, Ilara watched her first burning. The crowd gathered in the village square, children on shoulders, priests with torches, mothers gripping rosaries until their fingers bled. The woman they burned was old, her face a map of years and wind. Her crime was a stillborn calf and a neighbor's jealousy. Ilara remembered the flames more than the screams, how they didn't just devour flesh, but memory. After that, she learned to hide her mother's books under loose floorboards. At 10, she found her gift. A wounded sparrow had fallen from the church roof. When she held it, her small hands trembling, the bird's chest fluttered, weak then steady, and it flew. Her mother saw it, and she saw something else too: fear. "Never do that again," she hissed, eyes wide. "Not when others are watching." Ilara didn't understand. She was only trying to help. But in that moment, innocence ended, replaced by caution, a lesson the world would carve into her again and again. Years passed. The harvests began to fail. Frost came too early, rain too late. The villagers whispered of curses. The priests spoke of sin. When men of God cannot explain the weather, they look for women to blame. Ilara was 16 when her mother died. Fever in the night, delirium by dawn. The herbs that had saved dozens could not save her. At her burial, the priest refused to bless the grave. "Midwives meddle in God's work," he said. The villagers crossed themselves as if afraid the dirt itself might rise up and curse them. For weeks, Ilara stayed in the cottage alone, her grief silent but sharp. Then they began to come. First a mother with a sick baby, then a farmer with a festering wound. They came in secret, always after dark. She cured them all, and the more she healed, the louder the whispers grew. She has her mother's hands. She speaks to the herbs. She never goes to church. She was born under the blood moon. Rumors spread faster than plague, and in the 16th century, rumor was a death sentence waiting for parchment. Then came Father Matthias, a man of the cloth, sharp as a blade and twice as cold. He arrived with a leather-bound Bible and a heart full of fire. Where he walked, fear followed. He saw sin in laughter, temptation in beauty, rebellion in thought. And when he saw Ilara, he saw everything he'd been taught to destroy. At first he watched her from the distance, noted who came to her door, how the smoke rose from her chimney on moonlit nights. When the miller's wife recovered from a sickness that had baffled even the priest's prayers, Matthias called it unnatural. When Ilara refused his demand to confess, he called it pride. And pride for a woman was the first spark of witchcraft. Still, she kept healing, not because she wanted power, but because she could not bear to watch people suffer. A farmer's child with scarlet fever, a girl who'd swallowed poison berries, an old woman coughing blood. Ilara saved them all, and each miracle was another mark against her. One winter night, as frost painted the windows like lace, there was a knock on her door. 3 men stood there, breath fogging in the air, torches burning low. Behind them, Father Matthias's black robes fluttered like wings of a crow. "Ilara of Brunn," he said, "you are summoned by the Holy Court of Inquiry." Her voice barely rose above the wind. "For what crime?" "For consorting with the devil through unnatural means." The world seemed to stop. The torches hissed. Snow fell between them, silent as ash. They bound her wrists in rope that smelled of smoke and salt. Her cottage burned before they even reached the village square. Inside it, her mother's books turned to fireflies and vanished into the night. They locked her in a stone cell beneath the chapel, damp, dark, and humming with prayers. Each morning, the priests came with questions sharper than knives. They asked her how she healed, who whispered to her in the dark, what familiar spirits she served. She said nothing. Her silence angered them more than blasphemy. "Confess," they said. "God forgives those who admit their sins." But she had no sin to confess, and that made her dangerous. Still, she prayed, not to their God, but to the earth, to the herbs that grew even in darkness, to the stars she could not see. And somehow, her spirit stayed whole. While they saw a witch, she saw herself as a seed buried in shadow, waiting for spring. One guard, a young man named Thomas, began to pity her. He brought her water, whispered news of the village. "Your goat is dead," he said once, almost gently. "They say your smoke still rises from the ashes." Ilara smiled faintly. "Then they should know fire never dies easily." He didn't understand what she meant, not yet. But he would. The morning of her trial rose gray and soundless, as if the sky itself refused to watch. In the square below the chapel, the villagers gathered, faces pale with hunger, hearts gnawed by fear. They came not out of cruelty, but obedience. In the 16th century, obedience was the only armor against suspicion. The wooden stage creaked under the weight of its purpose. 3 judges, 1 priest, 1 scribe, and a pyre waiting nearby, unlit, but patient. When they brought Ilara out, the crowd inhaled as one. Her feet were bare, her gown rough linen, her wrists red from the ropes. Yet something in her eyes made men look away. They expected madness. They found calm. Father Matthias stood beside the judges, fingers curled around his crucifix like it could bite. "Ilara of Brunn," he intoned, "you stand accused of witchcraft, heresy, and blasphemy against God and his holy church." He paused, letting the words crawl into the silence. "You are said to speak with spirits, to heal with curses, to call storms, and command life and death." Ilara looked past him, to the faces she once healed, a mother she saved from fever, a farmer whose son she'd brought back from the edge of death. They looked away now, clutching rosaries, trembling at their own memories. Fear makes cowards of the grateful. The first day of the trial was for testimony. Each witness spoke, some with guilt, most with terror. "The child was dying," one said. "She whispered in his ear and he woke. That's not natural." "I saw herbs in her window, strange ones," said another. "She walks under the moon," someone muttered. "She doesn't flinch at thunder. She smiles when others cry." Every ordinary kindness twisted into evidence. Every act of mercy reshaped into sin. The scribe's quill scratched like a knife, each word a step toward the fire. When her turn came to speak, Ilara's voice was low but steady. "I healed because I could, because suffering has a sound I cannot bear." The youngest judge leaned forward. "And where did your gift come from?" She met his eyes. "From the same God you claim to serve." A ripple ran through the hall. Father Matthias slammed his hand on the table. "Blasphemy!" But she did not stop. "You call it witchcraft because you cannot control it. You call it sin because it is not yours." The guard stepped forward. Still, she did not look away. "Tell me, Father, when a man saves a life with a sword, you call him hero. When a woman does it with her hands, you call her witch." Her words hung in the air like smoke. The scribe hesitated before writing them down. Even he could feel the tremor of something larger than fear. The second day was for proof. They brought the instruments, iron needles, the rack, the chair with spikes cooled by centuries of screams. The law said confession cleansed the soul. Pain was its fire. They began at dawn. Questions, accusations, prayers muttered over her cries. But she did not confess. Not once. Not even when the ropes bit deep, when blood marked the stones, when her breath came in ragged shards. When she finally collapsed, they declared it a sign, the devil protecting his own. Father Matthias ordered her shaved, bathed in holy water, chained in salt. Still she survived the night. The priest began to fear that his enemy was not the woman before him, but the doubt within him. On the third day they brought Thomas, the young guard. He had been seen speaking to her. Matthias saw weakness in him and struck there like a hammer. "She bewitched you," the priest said. "Confess it." Thomas trembled. "I saw her heal a child," he whispered. "She prayed." "With whose words?" "With hers," Thomas said. And that was enough. They beat him until he said the words they wanted. She used the devil's tongue." The priest smiled like a man sipping wine. "Then we are done." That night, the verdict was written. Guilty of witchcraft and heresy. Execution by fire at first light. They left her chained in her cell, her body broken, her faith burning quietly beneath the ruin. The moonlight crept through the bars, thin as breath. Ilara whispered, not prayer, not plea, just words to herself. "If fire is their proof of holiness," she murmured, "then let it show how bright truth can burn." Thomas came once more before dawn. His face was swollen, eyes red with shame. "I tried," he said. "I told them you were good." "I know," she whispered, "but goodness isn't what they fear." He pressed something into her palm, a sprig of dried rosemary, the only thing left from her burned home. "For courage," he said. She smiled, faint but fierce. "Courage is easy when you've already lost everything." The bells began to toll. Footsteps above. Voices. The hour had come. They led her through the square where the villagers waited again. Children perched on barrels. Women wept into shawls. Men stood silent. No one met her gaze. The pyre stood tall, a monument to ignorance disguised as faith. As they tied her to the stake, the sky cracked open with distant thunder. She looked up, unflinching. The priest raised his hand, the torch in his grip shivering with light. "May this flame cleanse the darkness," he declared. But it was his own shadow that quivered in the firelight. When the torch fell, the crowd gasped. The flame caught fast, straw, wood, rope, gown. The smoke rose in spirals, carrying with it every unspoken truth she'd ever lived. Her scream never came. Only a low, steady sound, half prayer, half defiance. Her face bathed in gold, not agony. The priest faltered. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw her smile. Thomas fell to his knees, and the first drops of rain began to fall. The fire was meant to consume her, but instead, it consumed them. Their certainty, their righteousness, their illusion of control. The villagers said later that the rain came before her body turned to ash, that the sky itself intervened. But those who were closest, those who felt the heat on their faces, whispered something stranger. They said the flames did not scream. They sang. For a few heartbeats, it wasn't a burning, it was a coronation. The smoke curled like black ribbons around her, framing her face in something unearthly. Her eyes, still open, reflected the inferno not as fear, but as understanding. The same fire that was meant to destroy her had revealed her truth. She was not the monster, she was the mirror. And in that mirror, every soul saw itself. When the storm broke, it tore through the square with furious grace. The fire sputtered, hissed, then died. The pyre collapsed inward, wood snapping like bones. The priest clutched his crucifix, drenched in rain, shouting prayers he no longer believed. The villagers scattered, faces streaked with soot and tears. But one figure did not move. Thomas. He fell to his knees before the smoldering stake, trembling, reaching into the embers with shaking hands. The pain seared his skin, but he didn't stop until he found it. a single unburned strand of her hair, black and glistening like midnight. He held it to his heart. And in that instant, something shifted inside him. The kind of change that never heals, only transforms. For weeks after, the village refused to speak her name. They called it the cleansing, but crops failed, children fell ill, and thunder haunted the nights. Every Sunday, Father Matthias stood before his congregation, trying to summon God with words that now rang hollow. He felt her eyes on him, even in dreams. When he lifted the chalice, his hand shook. When he prayed, his voice broke, because somewhere deep within he knew, if she was a witch, then God had burned a saint. Months later, Thomas disappeared. He left behind the burned chapel, the silent fields, and the ashes of his faith. He wandered north, carrying her story in his memory, whispering it to anyone who would listen. He told of a woman who healed without asking for coin, who refused to bow to fear, who burned without breaking. And people listened, because every town had seen its own witch, its own outcast, its own Ilara. Soon, stories spread like wildfire through the countryside. They called her the Woman of the Flame. Some said she appeared in dreams, whispering courage into the hearts of the broken. Others said her ghost walked the fields at dawn, touching the crops, leaving dew where ashes once lay. Years passed. The witch hunts began to fade, not because men grew wiser, but because they grew tired of killing what they feared. And still, her name persisted. In songs sung by mothers to daughters, in carvings on church walls, in secret charms hung over newborns' cradles. They killed her body, but they could not bury her defiance. It had taken root in every woman who dared to speak, in every man who refused to watch another burn. Centuries later, when the pyres were only stories, historians searched for proof of her existence. Records were scarce, pages blackened, names lost. But in one forgotten ledger, they found a single line, scrawled in haste by a trembling scribe. Ilara of Brunn, executed by fire. No confession. Died smiling. That was all. No date, no repentance. Just that. Died smiling. It was enough. And so her legend outlived the church that condemned her. It outlived the empire that burned her. It outlived the fear that made neighbors turn into accusers. Because every few generations, the world finds another woman like her. Unyielding, unapologetic, unwilling to be tamed. They call her many names: heretic, witch, rebel, sinner. But beneath every title burns the same truth. They can scorch the body, but not the soul that refuses to kneel. In the silence between centuries, her voice still whispers through the wind, not as vengeance, not as curse, but as a reminder. The fire that kills the flesh can't touch the flame that makes you human. So when you stand alone, misunderstood, exiled, accused, remember her. Remember the rain that fell on her ashes. Remember that courage is not about winning. It's about burning without surrender. Because legends are not born from survival. They are born from the moments when survival seems impossible, and you rise anyway.